Welcome to the 2023-2024 Deep Dive Series, where we go and talk about every single team from worst to first, or should I better say from lowest rated to highest rated. We first had the Washington Wizards in at the bottom, starting their rebuild. Then we had the Charlotte Hornets, who are kind of in a perpetual rebuild. And now we are entering the tier where a team is beginning to come out of their rebuild with the Detroit Pistons, who have been in this rebuild process for about 4 years. Last year was one of the more interesting years that they've gone through, though. They went 17-65, worst record in the NBA. Cade Cunningham goes out for the entire season, basically with injury. And even with all of that, the lottery gods said, you have zero luck. They got the worst possible draft position with the 17-65 record, picking fifth. Whereas if they picked number 1 or number 2, they would probably be 2 years away from competing for a championship. So they're in a precarious spot. It's not bad. It's not good. It's just interesting. We'll have to see how these guys develop. But they did finish 15th last year, which is a little bit down from the year before because we all saw Cade Cunningham, we saw Jaden Ivey, we saw the potential upside of Jalen Duren, and they're just continuing to bring in young talent, throwing darts at the dartboard, seeing who's going to hit and who's going to stick and who's going to have to get cut like a Killian Hayes. But they are coming in with a 77.37 rating, putting them at the 28th seed. This is another one of those teams that is more than capable of outperforming, but injuries are always going to be a factor. How does a team mesh and develop? Young guys always struggle in the first few years of their career, and then they start to break out. But we'll talk about their offseason with the major moves. They are going to lose some small pieces. Now, there's nobody really dramatic here. Hami Diallo, bench guy, probably gets maybe 5 minutes a night. I like his game. He's aggressive. He's a scorer. He brought that FU mentality, even though he wasn't very talented. Corey Joseph, been a reliable veteran for the team, especially when Killian Hayes was being awful at basketball. RJ Hampton, I don't know if he got cut. He's been bouncing around. He's just been knocked off a couple teams because he's been inconsistent in his play. Eugene Omoruyi, a guy I liked out of Oregon. He just hasn't had the time to both step up, play healthy, and just have everything come together at the same time. Rodney McGruder, decent veteran, been around for a while, but he's always been like the 14th or the 13th guy on the roster. And then they are making a change at that head coaching position in Dwayne Casey, who a lot of people saw. He won Coach of the Year for the Toronto Raptors, and they said we need to move on. So he comes over to the Detroit Pistons, and I don't really know if he did a good job. I would say I'm leaning towards he did not do a good job, but at the end of the day, it's hard because this team was in a rebuild process. Should he really be blamed or discredited of his coaching talents because of what the team is doing? Hard to tell, but there is a guy who's coming in Monty Williams, who we will talk about later, but he's a guy known for establishing a culture in Phoenix, and the Detroit Pistons are paying him a handsome sum of money to establish culture here. And then guys are coming in like Cade Cunningham, coming back from the injury. He played, I want to say 12 games last year. It's on the next screen. We'll see. But just losing him for the entire year basically sunk everything. And they just said, you know what? Screw it. Damn the torpedoes. We're not going to do anything other than play our young guys and the occasional Bojan Bogdanovic minutes and just see what we have in this talent, who we need to keep, who we need to cut, who's going to stick around for the long-term future, and who's going to go. Ausar Thompson coming in, the number 5 overall pick. We'll talk about him. Marcus Sasser, the number, I want to say 27 overall pick. Interesting player. Not sure if he's going to crack the rotation. And then Joe Harris coming in. I'm not sure how I feel about this. Yes, he's one of the better shooters in the NBA. His defense is bad. He's so streaky with that three-point shot. When the shot isn't falling, he is borderline unplayable. And then Monty Morris coming over from Washington. They were clearing the decks. And I guess he's going to be the Corey Joseph replacement, veteran backup point guard. Not too bad for a team that doesn't really have a true point guard, but they do have a lot of guards on the rotation in a Cade Cunningham, Marcus Sasser, Jaden Ivey, Killian Hayes, Monty Morris. Who's going to crack the rotation and who's going to be left on the outside looking in? But let's start talking about the starting lineup for this Detroit Pistons squad. There's nowhere else to start other than Mr. Cade Cunningham himself. And would it have been great to pair him up alongside a number 1 overall pick, Victor Wembanyama? Sure, but there's not too many teams who have multiple number 1 overall picks on their team, just the way the lottery works. Now, he basically lost all of last season, which in theory could work out for this team. He gave almost all of his minutes and shots to Jaden Ivey, James Wiseman, Jalen Duren, Killian Hayes that they probably wouldn't have seen. But on top of that, Cade is a young player himself and an unproven number 1 overall pick who had a good rookie year, was a lot of people's favorites for rookie of the year, but he was also wildly inefficient. That 27% from the three-point line is really awful. He takes some mid-range jumpers that isn't great. The rookie year can basically be described as he was the best player on the court, taking the most shots and not making as many as he should in an efficient manner. But he's the point guard, he's the facilitator, he's the scorer, he's the rebounder. He was asked to do everything for this Detroit Pistons squad who had Guys like Isaiah Stewart starting way too many minutes. The 2021 roster was really bad. I can't even remember who they had. A lot of those guys aren't in the league anymore. Anyway, what I'm just saying is that the pace of the NBA was significantly quicker. He struggled with the three. And to me, he came off more as a big wing who can do it all for you than a facilitating point guard. That said, he was strong, he was good, and we don't have a lot of film from last year to review, so I can't rate him too high at an 81 overall right now just because he missed all of last season. But he is primed to break out. He is primed to be a most improved player of the year candidate. The first 12 games that he played last season were borderline incredible. He was a superstar in the making, blossoming right before our very eyes. There's something about the USA men's select basketball team where they get all the young guys to go up and scrimmage against the veterans just for practice before they take on the world basketball. And Steve Kerr is saying that Cade Cunningham is the best player in the court and impressing everybody. And that's exactly what you want to hear when you're a Detroit Pistons fan. He was taken #1 overall for a reason. This man is big. This man is strong. This man can do literally everything. He's supposed to be the second coming of a LeBron James, not the athletic side, but the mental side, the strength side. And Cade Cunningham is a polished product, and we're looking for a big year from him. I'm not going to gush too much more about Cade Cunningham because we just need to see more tape, see how he performs. And on the flip side of Cade Cunningham's slow, methodical pace of play is the explosive athlete in Jaden Ivey. And I was the biggest fan of Jaden Ivey coming out of the draft. I was a huge fan. And I think to this point, he's lived up to the hype as a #5 overall pick. He was clutch. He was confident. He's probably the fastest man with the ball in his hands in the NBA right now. There was that skills challenge or whatever in the NBA All-Star weekend where they do a whole bunch of crap with their teammates, but he flew down the court in record time because he's just so nimble and so agile. Now, the big issue with last season is that he was tasked with more ball handling, more point guarding than he's capable of doing, especially shown at Purdue. He's more of a combo guard who can score than a point guard who can facilitate and get his own shot. He plays too fast and was really turnover prone, averaging 3.2 turnovers last year, which he is a raw rookie. So you can't critique and criticize it too much. There's just a lot of room to grow for Jaden, and he's more than capable because he was one of the highest upside players coming out of the draft last season. Now, his shot at the three-point line didn't translate too well to the NBA. I believe he shot better in the second half of the season, but 34.3% isn't great. He was 36% from three in college and steadily improved from freshman to sophomore year at Purdue. And then with Cade Cunningham coming back, his facilitating responsibilities are going to lessen. It's not that Jaden Ivey isn't a passer, but he can lean more into his strengths as a slasher scorer, drive and kick kind of guy instead of running the offense, because that's what Cade Cunningham can do. What I'm mostly disappointed in, and this is just me as a scout, is that I was disappointed in his defense last year. Now, that's because he had to carry a lot of the offensive workload, and lo and behold, he was the best player on the court for about 90% of the Detroit Piston games. But when he was in college, man, he could defend like Davion Mitchell. He has elite side-to-side agility. We call it lateral quickness, and he is up there among the best of the best. He can slide his feet like a Russian ballerina, and he didn't show me that same prowess in Detroit. Now, that being said, in today's NBA, offense matters more than defense. He's not going to have as much responsibilities next season. Maybe he's going to be tasked with guarding the other team's best guard, and he'll do a phenomenal job, make it all defensive second team or something. I'm looking forward to him possibly having another most improved player hat thrown into the ring as well, because I think he's more than capable of taking that next step up. I believed in his game. I believe that he grew a lot from last season being tasked with running an NBA team in year one. And if anything, he's going to be asked to do a little less, but do everything that he did last year better. So I'm excited as far as Jaden Ivey is concerned. And now to the #5 overall pick, Ausar Thompson, or Ausar, however you say his name. I heard the Overtime Elite announcers call him Ausar, and then I hear the NBA Summer League announcers call him Asur. Regardless, I'm ignorant. I don't know how to actually say his name. Now, he's a really interesting player because he is a phenomenal player, a great athlete, a good facilitator, which I didn't expect seeing how Amen Thompson played. He lit up the Summer League, was dynamic, was electric, was a playmaker, and he looked like a bona fide #5 overall pick who might be the breakout Rookie of the Year candidate if Victor Wembanyama gets load managed like we're all rumored to hear about. But when I was watching his tape in Overtime Elite, and why he fell to, I believe, 9 or possibly out of the top 10 for me, was his lack of effort and his lack of shooting. Now, his lack of effort defensively really bugs me in the Overtime Elite squad. He has the capacity, the agility, the quickness to be a Kawhi on the defensive end, to be a Mikal Bridges caliber defender. I didn't know if he wanted to be, because that's what the kids love these days, is offense, is scoring, is shooting, is passing. Nobody cares about defense anymore. But if Ausar Thompson will play defense like he did in the summer league, jump the passing lanes, reading plays before they develop, being everywhere, jumping up 50 feet in the air with that elite athleticism to come in for the weak side block, he's going to be a great defender and exactly what this team was missing because they were struggling a long time with letting the other team's best players score points because they didn't have a primary wing defender. And Ausar Thompson can be that dude. The other problem is that he cannot shoot. And the fact that he was the quote-unquote shooter, the scorer of the Thompson twins, and he shot 29% from the three-point line and 67% from the free throw line is embarrassing. It's really rough, and I don't know what his upside is going to be. He's got one of those shots that you just need to break down completely and rebuild from the bottom up. And a lot of these players and a lot of the theme of the future of the Detroit Pistons is, can these guys learn to shoot? Because I wasn't a big fan of him going to the Detroit Pistons specifically because he can't shoot. Cade Cunningham showed that he's an okay shooter from three, but he's often asked to create his own shot, and that's why his three-point percentage is so low. You have Jaden Ivey, who's a decent three-point shooter, but no means electric. You have Bojan Bogdanovic, but he's a million years old. And then you have Jalen Duren, who isn't a great three-point shooter. Then behind them, you have Isaiah Stewart, who's just learning how to shoot the three. James Wiseman, who's not great at shooting three. Alec Burks is a good three-point shooter, and so is Monty Morris. But those guys are, what, 7, 8, 9, 10 men down the bench. All the young players right now in the Detroit Pistons squad cannot shoot, and that is a problem. And if I was the Detroit Pistons just looking at their squad right now, I would have just tried to figure out a way to move up to the number 2 spot. I don't think the Hornets were in love with taking Brandon Miller at number 2 overall. Well, I think the Detroit Pistons would be in love with a guy who shoots 40% from the three-point line with the frame of Brandon Miller, who could play the 3, who could play the 4, stretch the floor, and not be tasked with playmaking so much. Because you look at this team, the playmakers are everywhere, but when they kick and pass to the open man, who's going to shoot it besides Bojan Bogdanovic? Stick a box and one on him, and then everybody else has to create their own shot in the paint. It's not going to be great offense right now, and I'm wondering how Monty Williams is going to scheme up these guys to get open driving lanes because they can't even get open passing lanes. Anyway, enough talking trash on the Thompson twin. He's still an incredible player in his own right. He's got the build. He's got the wingspan. He's got the potential to be an incredible player. He's just a really raw prospect, which is why he's coming in at that 74 overall. I saw his brother Amen Thompson play a little bit better in overtime with the ball in his hands. He's more of a natural point guard, while Ausar Thompson is more of that wing player. We'll see. They're just really raw putty, and we're going to have to watch these guys develop in the coming years. Up next is Mr. Bojan Bogdanovic himself, the grandpa of the team. And last year was a surprisingly breakout year for him. We weren't expecting it. We kind of said, oh, he's going to go to the Detroit Pistons and kind of end his career because he is 34 years old. But last year, Bogey was a bucket, man. You look at these stats, you cannot deny 21 points per game, 41% from the three-point line. He probably had one of the best years of his career, and it was wild. Now, fans are going to complain that he's going to take away touches from the young guys, but he's a bona fide, efficient 15 to 20 points a night. Oftentimes last year, he was the only offensive weapon when the team was struggling, and you can point to his horrendous defense. I understand that, but he's out there to be a sniper and occasionally put the ball on the floor and bail your team out, and he was making tough shot after tough shot last night. So Bojan Bogdanovic is one of the more underappreciated players on this Detroit Pistons squad. No, he doesn't fit the timeline. No, the contract isn't great. If any of these guys take that next step up, he might be on his way out just to clear the decks for some of the other young guys. But for right now, Bojan Bogdanovic might be their best scorer offensively, seeing whatever Cade Cunningham is when he returns from injury. But credit to Bojan for having one of the best years of his career at age 33 last season. And we'll see if he's going to be able to keep it up this upcoming season as well. And then we have the starting center position, and I wasn't sure who they're going to go with here, but I believe since Jalen Duren was the incumbent draft pick last year, and Isaiah Stewart is too small, and James Wiseman is a really particular player who we'll talk about in a bit, Jalen Duren is going to go ahead and get the start. And last year, he was pretty monstrous of his own. He is just a strong rebounder. He is freaky built already. I talked about this when he was drafted last year at 18 years old. He's got grown man Adonis body. The dude is just ridiculously jacked, and he's not even 20 yet. He's going to be 19 coming into the season. He is the second coming of Dwight Howard. Imagine if he existed in a basketball 10 years ago. He would be an all-star. He would be an MVP caliber player. He's agile. He can switch onto the perimeter. So those 1-5 switches aren't a death sentence when he's playing. He's a good rebounder. He has a relentless motor. And now in the summer league, I'm even seeing a little offensive game. He's shooting the occasional three. He's shooting some elbow jumpers. Now his touch isn't great. I don't want to say it's non-existent, but he's one of those guys that throws the ball at the rim and kind of hopes it goes in. The shot clanks a lot instead of has a nice touch. And when I talk about touch, I'm talking about the Nikola Jokic little runners that he put up. When he shoots the ball and it hits the rim, it kind of bounces around and dribbles and often falls in on lucky bounces that guys like Jalen Duren doesn't get, because Jalen Duren is more of a thrower when he shoots the ball versus Nikola Jokic with his touch, the backspin, etc. Now, I do see him trying to dribble in the summer league, talking about Jalen Duren, and it's not great. He lacks finesse. He lacks polish. He kind of knocks himself off balance when he's driving in the paint, out of control, and he's just got a long way to go if he ever wants to be that guy. But that's the thing about Jalen Duren when he drafted him with the, I think, number 11, number 12 overall pick, is that he's already a Clint Capella. He's already a guy who's ready to be a rim runner, rim protector on both sides of the court. He's got good chemistry with Cade Cunningham by all reports on that USA Team Select team. He's a strong dude. Guys like Chet Holmgren can't bully him at all. And even though he's a little bit short, I think he's probably about 6'10". He is a starting caliber center and more than capable of holding his own as a rookie. He might take that sophomore jump as well and be a defensive player of the year candidate. But we are moving on to the next 5 of this team, starting with Monty Morris, who came over in that trade. And Monty was okay in Washington. He wasn't great. He wasn't terrible. We just kind of learned that he's a backup point guard at the peak of his career. He's what we call in the business a serviceable backup. He's a good slasher, decent shooter, had a really good year last year, 38% from 3, and just a good vet to have around the locker room. Statistically, it looks good, 10 points per game, 5-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. But those who watch the games and watch Monty Morris play game to game, his impact is much less than that on the court. He's not a playmaker, not a facilitator. His defense maybe is above average, below average, kind of right there. He's good enough, but when you have superstar guards in the making and a Jaden Ivey and a Cade Cunningham, you want Monty Morris to come off the bench and maybe not even get minutes for this Pistons squad, depending on how some of the younger guys play. Talking about guys who are going to get minutes, though, is Alec Burks. And it's just, for me, it was great last season seeing Alec Burks not get forced to play out of position and play point guard for the New York Knicks. Oh my gosh, Alec Burks could just do what he does. And he is a professional scorer. In the same vein as Bojan Bogdanovic, minus the horrible defense, Alec Burks can actually play. He shot 41% from 3 last year, 13 points a game, 3 rebounds, 2 assists. He was just doing everything that you expect from a backup combo guard, a KG vet who's been around the block more than a few times. Alec Burks is a very good backup to have. And this bench looks pretty good if you look at it. Monty Morris, Alec Burks, Isaiah Stewart, and then you have the question marks around those young bigs, Marvin Bagley, James Wiseman, Jalen Duren. So there's a lot of potential for this team to both play well with their bench rotation and upside from the younger guys, seeing what they can turn into. Now, I didn't know who's going to be the quote-unquote backup small forward and the big. Isaiah Livers might be part of the next 5, but it's really going to be an arms race between Isaiah Stewart, Marvin Bagley, and James Wiseman of who's going to step up for this team. Starting with Isaiah Stewart, who did get that contract extension. I believe it's 4 years at $15 million a year. And the reason for that is that Isaiah Stewart learned how to shoot the 3. Now, it wasn't great, 32.7%, but it was on pretty decent volume, 67 of 205 from the field last year. He's always been a tenacious, undersized rebounder, 6'8", and he's kind of morphing and transitioning into that stretch 4 instead of being the undersized backup 5, because he was borderline out of the league before he started jacking up 3s last year. Not for any lack of talent, but just because he doesn't have any polish on the offensive end. He was almost a black hole, too undersized to really be a lob threat for Cade Cunningham. Not a big enough guy at the 5 to be a defender against guys like Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid. His size was an issue, but he has no lack of heart. He was just a big, hard-nosed, tough guy who's going to try every single night. And now that he's added a 3-pointer to his arsenal, if he can continue to boost that up and be more of an Al Horford for this team, they could rock some double big lineups with an Isaiah Stewart and James Wiseman paired up, or a Marvin Bagley and Jalen Duren paired up. They could be really versatile on this team. They could go big, they could go small. Basically, they could do anything, whatever Monty Williams deems to be correct. But Isaiah Stewart is going to be around for the long haul, and it's good to see he got paid. I'm a little worried about the length of the contract, but in today's NBA, it's not an overpaid to give a guy like him $15 million a year while he's steadily improving. He's still super young, going to be 22 this season, And like I said, get that 3 up, continue to play tough both sides of the court. Isaiah Stewart could be a viable option at the 4 for this team. Another guy on this team that's coming over is Marvin Bagley, and he and James Wiseman. I really appreciate the pickups that Troy Weaver is doing here, and he's just taking dart throws at number 2 and number 1 overall picks, and he's taking dart throws at picks that other teams have made that they deem busts, and he's saying, well, maybe they're a bust because they didn't fit into your system. Let's bring them over here. Let's see what they got. We're not going to give up too much draft capital for a guy who was picked at number 2 overall at one point, had that kind of talent. Now, they probably won't pan out, but you never know. You got to keep taking dart throws at players in the NBA and see what sticks. And that's what Marvin Bagley is a guy who didn't stick. And I just don't really know how to describe Marvin Bagley in the court other than he's just kind of dumb when he plays. He makes head-scratching decisions constantly, takes bad angles, puts up bad shots, just not a high basketball IQ kind of guy. And while I appreciate that he finally got an opportunity after toiling away in Sacramento, he hasn't really shown anything that he can bring to an offensive team that's NBA caliber other than his size and offensive aggressiveness. Now, there might be a spot in the league for him as a hardworking, undersized big, but not a number 2 overall pick like we saw going ahead of Luka Doncic back in the day. Now, I've seen him play monstrous for stretches of games. He can be an offensive weapon, which only confirms that the only issues for him is mental. It's effort. It's giving a shit. Get that Giannis intensity so he can be a positive player on the court. But when he's playing lazily, he'll make a mistake. He'll take a bad, ugly shot. It's kind of his normal day-to-day, game-to-game mentality. It gets pretty ugly. He's an awful defender, both effort and on the perimeter. He's too small to be a 5 and one of those tweener basketball players. And the league just kind of moved away from guys like him. 28% from 3 isn't going to cut it. Beef Stew came in and he shot on high volume 32% in the first year he actually started taking threes. Meanwhile, Marvin Bagley's going to go into what, year 4, year 5, and he still can't shoot from 3? That's a problem. So I don't know if Marvin Bagley's going to crack the rotation, and he's one of those guys that I fully expect to be out of the Detroit Pistons squad after a little while because they picked up a guy that's a little more talented and a little taller in James Wiseman. And I was huge on James Wiseman's stock. I just didn't know how he fits in today's NBA, and I don't know how he fits into this Pistons squad. He is a volume scorer, and he needs the offense to run through him. Now, obviously, that didn't happen in Golden State while there's a man named Steph Curry, while there's a man named Klay Thompson, while there's a man named Draymond Green. But he's just so gifted athletically. The amount of floor that he can cover is special. His thing, similar to Marvin Bagley, is it's just all mental. His basketball IQ, his tendencies on the court. He needs reps and he needs good coaching because he's played less than 100 games since high school, from suspension to injuries to Golden State hating him. He just doesn't have NBA experience. So while he's going into his 4th season, he still plays like a rookie, like a sophomore player. He doesn't have those minutes. He doesn't have those reps. Now, there's a few things that he needs to work on. Number 1, he sets awful screens. Oh my gosh. The James Wiseman screens aren't even screens. He doesn't put a body on you. He just kind of grabs the guy that's going to switch and then pushes them down into the paint. And then he calls for the ball. He posts up. And it gets ugly because last year, most of the time, Corey Joseph couldn't get him the ball in the entry pass. And then if Corey Joseph did get him the ball, while he was posted up, while he did have a size mismatch, he doesn't have the polish of the post move. So he'd put up an awful, baiting, tough jump hook, miss, and then just go run back like that was his job. Like he did something good, and he did that repeatedly over and over. And just at this point in his career, I need him to stop demanding the ball in the post. He's always going to be turning around, putting his back to the basket and throwing one of those big paws up and calling for the ball. But he's not Joel Embiid, man. He needs to roll hard. He needs to be a lob threat. Use that 7-foot frame and that freak athleticism that he has to his advantage. Eventually, when he gets a little more polished on his back to the basket game, I'm totally fine with him setting up and demanding the ball. But there's other guys like a Cade Cunningham or Jaden Ivey on this team that are more versatile and they're better offensively than he is. Now, he is working on the three-pointer. I saw a lot more threes in the summer league than I did in the regular season, and I think they're telling James, just let it fly, man. You were listed and you were marketed as a three-point shooting 7-footer, and he's just got to let it go, let it rip, shoot 33% from 3 or whatever it's going to be instead of taking 20 shots for the entire season, stretch the floor, give this team a little more space because right now they're just crowded in. This team plays like it's the 90s still, and they have no shooting. Now, his defense it's interesting because he has all the athleticism, all the size, all the wingspan in the world. He could theoretically be a great defender, but it's all basketball IQ when it comes to him. He's slow in rotations, which negates his defensive impact ability. He doesn't make the right reads, doesn't make the right switches, and I attribute all that to his lack of reps. I watched a lot of James Wiseman when he came over to the Pistons, because that was the first time we really saw this number 2 overall pick get to play. And I got to tell you, I wasn't fully impressed, but I think there's potential there. I think there's a starting future center job for James Wiseman if he puts it all together. It's just a big if, and there's guys like Jalen Duren who have already proven that they're a little bit better than him in their rookie season. But that is my James Wiseman spiel. While we head on to the next of the next 5 for this team, or should I say 4, because they still have one open roster spot, starting with Killian Hayes. Now, man, Killian Hayes is interesting. We have to keep in mind that he's only like 21 or 22 years old, and he was a complete and total bust the first 2 seasons. Like, unplayable, belongs in basketball Siberia. And then he had a couple breakout games last year where he battled Luka Doncic, and I think he hit a game winner. And then you step back and look at his stats and you go, wow, he went head to head with Luka, but he's still the same player, a bad shooter, a mediocre passer. And the real improvement from last year was his confidence and his assist to turnover ratio. Other than that, he still kind of sucked. He's a borderline, maybe backup point guard. He might have like a Ricky Rubio type of career at some point down the road. But for now, I think we can all agree that there isn't a superstar number 7 overall pick point guard in Killian Hayes. And there's likely not even a starting caliber point guard. And I just don't know what he can offer to your team when he's just another guy who cannot shoot. While there's guys like Marcus Sasser that are being taken, while there's already all those superstars ahead of him, I think he's going to see a significant minutes reduction. And I don't know what his impact is going to be on the court other than backup to the backup to the backup to the backup point guard. It's unfortunate, but it's just the way that it goes with these players who turn out to be busts. Next up is Marcus Sasser, who we've been talking about a little bit. Now, he's one of those guys that bugs me because whenever you talk about him and his game, all the scouts are like, he's a winner. He's a dog. He gives you effort, which is meaningless when you're talking about NBA scouts. He's an undersized, quick trigger shooting guard. When he was moving out there in the summer league, he looks a little bit like Buddy Hield, but he is a knockdown 3-point shooter, and that is valuable for this team, which is why their deep bench is surprisingly better at shooting than their mid bench. So I'm not sure where to put some of these guys. Like Joe Harris, an embarrassment defensively, but he shoots 42% for 3. That'll work. Isaiah Livers, not a great player, but he shoots 36% from 3. Does that mean he's going to earn more minutes than a Sir Thompson? I'm not really sure, but Marcus Sasser, it is a knockdown 3-point shooter. He's coming into the league a little bit older, 22 years old out of Houston, was a 4-year guy. And like everybody says, he's a winner, he's a shooter, he's a gamer, he's a fighter, he's a good point of attack defender, but he is only about, I want to say 6'1", and he's not a great defender. He's not like Davion Mitchell, able to move side to side with the quickness of a gazelle. He's a decent defender, and he more than makes up for his lack of size if he's playing other shorter guards like a Fred VanVleet. But if you ask him to go up against a guy that's like Anthony Black or Cade Cunningham size, it's going to be a significant disadvantage. But that shooting is invaluable for this Detroit Pistons squad. I expect to see him get a little bit run, and maybe we'll see what he develops into. He is a first-round pick, so he's locked in on a 4-year deal with that 5th-year qualifying offer. We will see. Next up is Joe Harris. And Joe Harris is Joe Harris, the most head-scratching player in the history of basketball, because at one point, when last seen, people were saying he is a better shooter than Steph Curry. He shoots 42% from the 3. But not all threes are created equal, and he's one of those guys that hits threes when it doesn't matter and misses when it does. There's just something about the mental aspect of the game of basketball for these guys where a guy like him is going to miss a 3 in the 4th quarter, while a guy like KCP is going to make it. And KCP is actually a decent defender, while Joe Harris is a constant blow-by threat. Hence why his VORP is only 0.3, but he's shooting literally in the top 10 when it comes to 3-point shooting. So I appreciate the Pistons trading for him. I appreciate them getting some spacing on this team. It came at the cost of it being Joe Harris, but we will see, because Bojan Bogdanovic had a breakout year last season. Maybe Joe Harris will have a breakout year, play a little bit better defense, continue to shoot well from 3, space the floor, which this team really needs, and hell, maybe he might even play a little bit of defense for this team, but we'll see in the upcoming season. And lastly is the man Isaiah Livers, who's kind of been an interesting player for this team. I forget if he was a 2nd-round pick or if an undrafted player, but he was basically trying to fight Saddiq Bey for minutes. And the difference between him and Saddiq was that he played a little bit of defense and shot 36% from 3, while Saddiq didn't play much defense at all. Now, Isaiah Livers is probably the 15th man on the bench that you want to have on your team. Sometimes he'll have a breakout game where he'll score 10, 15 efficient points a night. But for him, you don't really want him to do much more than catch and shoot from the 3-point line, maybe make a 45-degree cut, and then try to D up the other team's 2nd-best wing player, because he doesn't have defensive stopper capabilities. He's good enough to be out there and not be broken and get exploited, hence his negative 0.1 VORP. He is a decently young player too, 25 years old, but I just don't expect to see too much from him. And now on to the rest of this roster, where you have Malcolm Casalona, two-way guy. He's your classic perfect NBA build, but cannot shoot all that well, can't dribble all that well, can't facilitate all that well. So he's not really a catch and shoot guy. He's not really a defensive stopper. He's just kind of in between. Him and actually Jared Roden are very similar players. They're more defenders than offenders. They can't really handle the ball well, but they're not freaky athletic. So they're just both decent guys. Maybe one of them is going to crack the rotation. Then you have Tosan Evbuomen. I don't know how to say his last name. He's not great. He's an undersized big, and he has a chance, especially on this Pistons team, because they love their hard-working undersized bigs in Marvin Bagley and Isaiah Stewart. Hell, even Jalen Duren is like 6'9", 6'10". He's not a great athlete, and he's got that slow, plodding movement that some of these bigs have that makes him borderline unplayable on the perimeter because he has to switch on to quicker guards. And when he's switched around, they're going to need to help immediately, and this team just isn't really built like that given their defenders. So I don't see him cracking the rotation. And then everybody's favorite player, Buddy Boeheim. He's just a bucket. He can shoot from any angle, off balance, off platform, catch and shoot, off rhythm, in rhythm. Buddy Boeheim is a bucket. It's just so sad that he cannot play defense to save his life. He's not a bad defender. He's a statue and a constant blow-by threat because, man, if he just had a pinch more of athleticism, he would be somewhere in that Duncan Robinson, Max Strus range of shooters who's getting $15, $20 million a year. But man, he cannot move his feet to save his life. But that is going to be it for the players right now. We expect to see some of those guys make the 15th man on the rotation, or maybe they'll pick up somebody like a PJ Washington who's just sitting out there waiting to be signed. With their coaching culture ranking, they're going to come in at tier 3. I didn't want to go too high. I didn't want to go too low. If they kept Dwayne Casey, they'd probably be in that tier 4 of not great, but they do have a direction. And we've been buying into Troy Weaver's vision for a while now. The Detroit Pistons are following their own blueprint of trust the process. And so far, Detroit fans have been sticking around. They got that #1 overall pick in Cade Cunningham, and they've been believing. Last year sucked, and I get that. But this year, with Monty Williams coming around to set a culture for this team, is really going to be important for them to move in the right direction, because a lot of these guys are young and they're 21, 22, 23 years old. There's a few cagey vets like Bogdanovich and Burks to kind of push and move them in the right direction. But for the most part, they're going to need to look to their leader. And Monty Williams showed that he could be that guy, especially what he did in Phoenix. Now, I don't love Monty Williams as a coach or a team with championship aspirations. He often got out-coached by guys like Ty Lue, by guys like even Darvin Ham, Mike Malone. He's a proven winner. He's shown that he can take a team to the NBA Finals with all the talent in the world. And now the Suns are floundering and trying to figure out what to do in spite of him. He does get on the bad side of a few players. Nobody will ever forget how much fighting went on between Monty and DeAndre Ayton. And that's understandable, but at the same time, you got to bring these young guys along. You took DeAndre Ayton with the #1 overall pick. Imagine if you got into a fight with Cade Cunningham and you had to say, who are we going to keep, Monty Williams or Cade Cunningham? Well, the NBA is a players-driven league. You got to take the player. But I believe in Monty Williams. I love him as a man and a mentor. I believe he's going to be nothing but positive for this Detroit Pistons squad as they continue to buy into Troy Weaver's vision. And I believe, man, this year they could make the playoffs. Next year they could fight. And 2-3 years from now, this team could seriously have some championship expectations. But looking at their salary cap positioning, they're in a pretty good spot. The only contract that kind of stands out to me is that Isaiah Stewart $15 million deal. Basically, they got Bogdanovich locked down for 2 years, $20 million. And we kind of expect them to trade him away this season if some of the other guys start to shoot, if some of their guys start to hit. His services won't be needed here, and maybe he'll be needed on a playoff-ready team that's willing to give up a little bit of salary cap hell for tomorrow so that they can win now. And then you have Joe Harris, $19 million, but he's going to be coming off the books. And then you have Marvin Bagley, $12 million. They might just trade him away too or cut him. James Wiseman, $12 million. I don't know if he's going to get that $15 million qualifying offer. So next year's free agency looks pretty good if they make a few smart cap decisions. Also, it's Detroit. I don't know how big of a free agent they're going to be able to sign here, but the rest of the roster, they're on their rookie deals. Cade Cunningham locked up for 2 more years. Alec Burks gone. Monty Morris gone. Oscar Thompson locked up for 4 years. Jaden Ivey locked up for 3. Sasser for 4. Isaiah Stewart now locked up for 5 years with, I believe, a team option in that 2027 season. Jalen Duren locked up for 3 more years. Killian Hayes going to be gone after this year. Isaiah Livers only on a 1-year deal. Then you got the 2-way contracts on Casalone and Roden and the exhibition contracts for Buddy Boeheim and Evbuomen. So I like what the Detroit Pistons are doing. I know a lot of Pistons fans were a little disappointed at their lack of movement. They were saying that they were going to try to target Cam Johnson. And I appreciate what Cam Johnson can bring, but I would like them to go get a superstar wing player to pair up alongside with Cade Cunningham. I don't know if Asar Thompson, Asir Thompson is going to hit. At the same time, if they could get Mikal Bridges on their team, but they could figure out how to get a Kawhi Leonard on their team or one of those superstar wing players that are waiting to bounce around a bit. If a Giannis ever comes available, guys that are really going to move the needle and pair him alongside Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren, this team is ready to go over the top. And that's why losing this year's lottery really sucked. It kind of feels like it set the team back, but at the same time, they're still more than capable of being a competitive team for the long-term future. But that is going to be where we leave this team. Their season projections isn't great. 27.5 wins, which is a 10-game boost from last year when they only won 17. So that's the Cade Cunningham effect. That's the Asir Thompson effect. That's the Monty Williams effect. And if I'm a betting man, I'm more than taking the over on this team. I fully expect them to win 35 games. I fully expect them to make the playoffs. I don't even think they're play-in bound because of the way that the East is set up. I think they're playoffs bound. I think they could be a 7 seed, a 6 seed, legitimately, if everything starts to click and Cade Cunningham is playing as impressive as everybody is saying. But their championship odds are horrible, which is why they're coming in at 77.37 as 28th in the league. Just another team with a bright future. They got a lot of pieces that are ready to take off. They just need to launch. That is going to do it for the Detroit Pistons deep dive. Let me know what your thoughts are, what you agree with, and what you disagree with, and I'll catch you in the next one.